your senator, I also serve on the Joint Senate Task Force on Heroin and Opioid Addiction. And again, I really do thank each and every one of you for attending this very important life-saving training. This is our 6th training session that we have put on. This is our last training session. We had 2 in Saratoga, 2 in Rensselaer, and this is our 2nd here in Columbia County. And this is all about learning the safe, proper administration of Narcan. You know, we've described Narcan as a miracle drug, and it has saved thousands of lives that would otherwise have been lost to heroin addiction. You know, your own sheriff here, Dave Bartlett, called me. We had a forum on heroin addiction back in April. And I realized when we had that forum and we completely filled the Hudson Valley Community College auditorium and overflowed into a second room with 50 other people, that this was a very serious issue. We had 18 professionals as part of the forum. The forum was supposed to last 9 until noon. We stayed until 1, and we still didn't have an opportunity to listen to everyone who wanted to speak. And Dave Bartlett at the time was part of that expert panel. He called me about a month afterwards and he said, I want to tell you the story. I went onto a scene where there had been an overdose of heroin. And I got to the scene and my deputy said that the person had died. And he said, did you administer Narcan? And the deputy said, no, Sheriff, really, the person is already deceased. And he said, I want you to try. And they administered Narcan, and the person was revived and is living today. The other day, I heard in Rensselaer County, again, a sheriff's department, gave Narcan to a young woman who had overdosed, and they saved her life. And the beauty of this story is that that girl had 2 young children. And they would have been without a mom. So, you know, each and every one of you who is here is going to have that potential to be the person who could save another person's life. And that to me is just, you're the new first responders that we'll be able to count on. And you know, it's not a new drug. Since 1996, there have been 10,000 reported cases of heroin reversals by using Narcan. And they say that there's thousands more, but those are the reported cases. So it's a miracle drug. I want to introduce our partners in this, and they've been proud. I'm so proud to partner with them. And the more I get to know them, the more I want to partner with them in the future. And that's Catholic Charities Care Coordination Services. They are absolute professionals, and they're going to be providing today's instructions to you. I want to recognize each of them so you know who they are. To my left over here is Keith Brown, who is the Executive Director of Catholic Charities Care Coordination Services, and Keith will say a few words once I'm finished. Stephanie Lau is over here in the black sweater. She helped check you in. She's the Associate Executive Director. Joseph Filippone, who's right here, is the program manager. Joseph will be providing most of the instructions that you will hear this evening. And I also want to introduce you to the staff members that I have from my office. In case you want to contact us, you'll know some of the staff members, or at least have been introduced. The gentleman sitting in the back, wave your hand please, is Peter Gemolaro. Peter is a law professor. It's his full-time job at Hudson Valley Community College, but works for me for legal services and legislation. Next to him is Stephanie Gardner, and next to her is Deb Simmons-Meyer, who is my constituent director for Columbia County. If you don't know it, I do have an office. We have a presence here in Columbia County in Hudson. We're above the county clerk's office where DMV is, and we've been there since I became senator. So don't ever hesitate to call us. You won't be able to see her, but she's sitting next to Stephanie, and that's Kate Jeanson, who is my events coordinator, who has been in charge of getting all of this together. So I thank all of my staff, I thank Catholic Charities, and I thank each and every one of you who are giving your time tonight to learn about this life-saving job. Thank you all for coming. Keith?
So since Joe's not going to use a microphone, I'll sort of guinea pig whether everybody can hear me. You got me in the back, right? We both tend to talk loud, so I don't think it'll be a problem. So I want to recognize the Senator and her staff. This has been an amazing experience to have, community agencies and elected officials partner up in this way. And we've had folks who are first responders and law enforcement and people with family members who are impacted by heroin and opiate use and abuse in all the communities we've done the trainings in. So this has been a really remarkable experience for us, and so I want to thank them. I want to thank my staff. This has been a long week for all of us, and so having this be the last training, to see so many folks here, as it has been all week, it's a bittersweet thing for us, because we'd certainly rather not be here in a lot of ways, and to not have to be responding this way to what is a problem that's impacted every community. But on the flip side, to see so many people here that are interested in this training, that, again, like the Senator said, is safe, effective, saves lives, preserves families, prevents tragedies for folks. It's really a pretty amazing thing. So. Just a little bit of sort of practical sort of housekeeping stuff. The bathrooms are right back here. I apologize if they're right behind where the screen is, but this is the only wall we could really use here. The way the training is going to work here, so Joe's going to do the training. Practical, you'll have a chance to kind of monkey around with the kits a little bit to practice how to put them together, because it's super self-explanatory, but it's easy. And then what'll happen is, after we're done with the training, you folks will go over the table over there to get your kit. Okay, so the piece of paper you have that you filled out, I know it's weird that it's a medical history. That only goes to us. It stays in our files. It doesn't go anywhere else. So I don't want you to be nervous about that. So it just stays with us. It's just part of the regulations behind the program. This is a complex issue, heroin and opiate use and abuse in our communities. Everybody's got a lot of experiences. Everybody has a lot of feelings, opinions about this. In trying to be sensitive to everybody's time, you took time out of your lives to come here. Let's try to keep questions, comments, things like that related. We want it to be a participatory process. Again, we have people who are law enforcement, first responders, other folks here. Those experiences are really valid for what we're talking about, but let's try to keep it to the training, naloxone, overdose risk factors, how to recognize and respond to an overdose, that kind of stuff. Stephanie and I are here so that if folks have other questions, more general questions about the program, overdose, heroin, and opiate abuse, the treatment landscape, all of that stuff, I would ask, we'll stay as long as we have to kind of talk to people about that. We've been staying till far after the training, just hearing people's stories, talking about everybody's experiences, and we want to be able to do that. So we'll be here. So I'll be somewhere in the back or lingering around. Stephanie will be around too. So enjoy the training. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of really interesting information, and I hope you folks really feel like it was a benefit to be here. And so thanks again for coming, and we'll be around. Be happy to meet you folks after the training's over. So thanks again, and I'll turn it over to Joe Filippone, our program manager.
All right, so thank you all for coming this evening. As Keith said, we really do want you to ask questions. I mean, I think one of the things we like to say is that, there's a lot of people in this room coming from different approaches in different areas, have different bases of knowledge, and our hope today is kind of to fill some gaps and kind of give everyone kind of a complete picture. Having said that, I'll do my best to kind of answer questions and keep everything on topic and keep you guys moving, because we promise you have you out here in about an hour and 15 minutes, okay? So what are the goals for the training today? The goals are give you the background, kind of a little bit of what's going on, kind of how we got here, why we're seeing so much overdose, why we're seeing so much dependence and addiction. Understand the physiology of an opiate overdose, the signs and symptoms of an opiate overdose, as well as take away the ability to use naloxone to reverse an opiate overdose. Okay, any questions so far? All right, so a lot of people who've heard of naloxone in the past and you've seen media, there's the impression that, like, oftentimes it's the impression that there's going to be a big syringe and you're going to jam it in somebody's heart or something along those lines. That's not what this is about. What we're doing is we're doing intranasal kits. So they're intranasal, they go meaning the nose, they're going to go in the nose. Really nice because you don't have to worry about needle sticks and things like that. So really nice little tool to have. But we're not doing the syringes, so you don't need to worry about that piece. Your kits are going to come with 2 doses of naloxone, 2 Luerlock prefilled syringes, a face shield, and gloves. Okay? They'll also come with a little palm card that breaks everything down. I mean, the reality is, yes, ma'am?
I'm sorry, is there any way you can use the mic when you turn and you're not facing me? I have a hard time hearing you.
Okay. I'll tell you what, I'll shout louder.
Okay.
So, the way, it's also going to come with a palm card that breaks everything down. The reality is you're not going to remember everything that I say tonight. So the palm card will break down what you need to do to respond to an opioid overdose, just the basics of it, so you don't need to worry about trying to have to memorize everything and walking away with it, okay? You guys, we talked about that. Okay, we talked about the prescription piece. We're going to kind of work back through a little bit of history here. Really important piece to understand about this isn't just something we're training you to do because it's kind of the hot buzz topic. This is something that's been developing over time. It's officially declared a CDC epidemic. Really important piece to understand about this and where we're at is, and someone said this the other night, again, I don't want to take credit for it, is that ever since the automobile rolled off the lines, that's been the #1 cause of unintentional death in the country. Anyone remember when the automobile rolled off the line? Have a rough year?
1908.
Okay, how many years ago was that? Anybody quick with math? A lot. So, opiates have now surpassed that. Yeah, perfect. Opiates have now surpassed that. Okay. There's a generally accepted idea, and it's fairly accurate of how we've gotten here, and it's this. Is as you can see from, it's in 1991, 2011 this is, the rate increase of opioid prescriptions. What you're seeing is the number of prescriptions going out to people, okay? You have more drug going out, you have more drug availability to be, drugs available to be diverted, okay? So, just to give you an idea, a little background. So there's a generally accepted idea of kind of how we've gotten here. It's this, is that people typically have access to prescription pills. People start with prescription pills. Prescription pills are quite expensive. When prescription pills become quite expensive, people learn that heroin is much cheaper. People will often start smoking heroin or sniffing heroin, and then will end up injecting heroin when they realize it's much cheaper. So Oxycontin, those heavy-duty drugs, they can be $40, $50, $60 a pill some places. Heroin's about $10 a bag, $15 a bag, substantially cheaper. So really what it comes down to is, you'll find this piece sort of fits very well together, is that it's also sort of, it's a product of profitability, there's more drugs out there, and it's sort of a product of economics. That's sort of the generally accepted idea. Statistics suggest that 80% of people who eventually start using heroin start with prescription pills. It's what's available. Okay? And then obviously what you see is if you're putting more pills in people's hands, you're putting more people sort of at risk, you see overdose rise. So there's a fairly perfect parallel between the increase in prescriptions being written and the increase in overdose deaths. This is sort of what's going on locally. From 07 to 09, again, the statistics are a little older, they still bear true. You saw hydrocodone prescriptions increase 18.4% from 3.8 million to 4.5 million. Oxycodone scripts increased 82%. Again, you can see an increase. The slide we take out of here, we used to have it in there. Basically, it was this, that the United States consumes 99% of the world's hydrocodone. 99%. It's 1% of the rest of the world. If you anybody know the population differentiation between the rest of us and the rest of the world, it's fairly substantial. Sort of what we do now. Hydrocodone was the most commonly prescribed controlled prescription. We're not talking, and this is what we're talking about, the most commonly prescribed controlled prescription, not antibiotics, any of that. It's hydrocodone. Really important piece to take away from this is that we can play a little bit of a role in taking care of some of the diversion. There's been a couple things done to do this. Anybody familiar with iStop? You guys know what iStop is?
It's a website that you have to go on as a medical professional before you can prescribe narcotics. The fault in that is it only shows what you're filling in the state of New York. So before we write a prescription at the doctor's office, we have to go on this website, we put in our information, your information, and it shows us exactly what narcotics of any type that you've gotten, how many you've gotten, and who wrote them.
That's the idea. So it's to curb what's called doctor shopping. Basically what it is sort of in the loosest of terms is in real time a medical professional is supposed to look on a database, sort of see a prescription that's been written to you, and the idea is that if you went to a doctor a previous day and got a prescription, Doctors will be able to see that and make sure that the prescription doesn't get written so you're not getting double scripts and more prescriptions aren't getting out into the street. The other side of it is, I believe, you go to the pharmacy and have the same sort of process happen. The idea is that you want to cut down on the supply chain. The problem with that is you do have a significant portion of people who are using it. What happens when you cut out one piece of the supply chain? You cut out, you raise one of the other ones, and that's where you see an increase in heroin use. Again, really important piece that I want to acknowledge this is that 70% of these pills come from family and friends. They're diverted through our medicine cabinet. So it's simple things like you go to the dentist, oftentimes you get a little toothache, they give you a 30-day supply for a 2-day pain. And so you're taking, what happens to those, most people take those, they take what they need, the rest sits, and eventually they get diverted. Okay? One of the things I want to acknowledge is sort of exciting, is that I know you guys are one of the first counties to really have a standard structured prescription drop box. I believe it's in the Sheriff's Department. Anybody verify that? Okay. I believe it's at one of the police stations out here.
I know they're bringing one in Hudson, I think one of the counties, or twice a year.
Okay, they installed one that you can regularly drop off. I mean, it's not easy. The reality is it's not easy to get rid of prescription medications. A lot of pharmacies won't take them. You can't flush them. The idea is, the hope is that we can make it easier for people to get rid of prescriptions, continue to kind of diminish the supply. Really last piece about this, what we do background, is just this, is that it's sort of become a normalized behavior to use prescription pills amongst youth. Okay, sort of where it used to be alcohol and marijuana, now sort of prescription pills are just a third kind of rung right alongside there. So something that's just commonly, it's accepted behavior, it's accepted practice. Okay? Any questions about any of that stuff before we move on? All right, so what is an overdose about? My goal is to explain this to you in the simplest terms. I'm not a medical professional. I'd like to make it them good at doing things in sort of layman's terms, so that's what I'm going to give you tonight. The simplest way to think about overdose physiology is this, is that opioids, you take them, this happens naturally when you take them, they attach themselves to the receptors in your brain that signal the body to breathe. Okay? So we're talking essentially about a signal system up here. So when you take those pills, basically what happens, or heroin or anything along those lines, is it shuts down the signal system. So it's about respiratory depression. The principal factor in opiate overdose death, or opiate overdose, is respiratory depression. It's simply not breathing all up here. So if you know some of the myths about what you do to wake somebody from an opiate overdose, anybody heard these before? Okay. Ma'am, do you mind sharing?
Ice,
Where?
going,
Okay.
cold water.
Cold water, shower,
Shower.
coffee. We were doing a group with a bunch of clients in an outpatient treatment center about overdose. One of them brought up chocolate and orange juice. I was like, I don't know how that's gonna get.
Also the injection of milk and salt
Yep.
water.
Yep, bleach. Yep. So the reality is, I always like to reframe this as this, is that I think, people think, why would you do that to somebody? Like, what were you thinking? It's like, the reality is people don't know. People don't know what it's about. But I also think you want to honor that people are trying to do something. And a reality is, if you give people the right tools, you teach people the right tools, programs like ours are actually designed to train the individual who's being closest to the overdose, meaning oftentimes it's the person who's actively using. So if you give people the right information, they're going to change their behavior, they're going to understand what they're looking at. So at times there's a hesitancy to give that. So a lot of what we think about here, our goal here, while as much as we're training you to use naloxone, we are using this as an outreach opportunity and sort of a train the trainers. Our expectation and hope is that you go back and tell somebody else, and you dispel some of these myths. So the reality is, people spend a lot of time doing those kinds of things, and they're trying to do something. And you only have a short amount of time before sort of respiratory system shuts down, and you start to have irreversible damage sets in. So you need to have people know what they're looking at and know what they're seeing and know how to respond appropriately, so they're not wasting time doing other things. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. So this is a little bit, just showing you kind of the opiate spinning receptors like this. But again, what you want to know is it's about the signal system up here. Okay. It's not about anything else wrong with the body. So what is naloxone? Naloxone is a standard of care for opioid overdose. I believe it's been used since I think about the 60s. Available over the counter in countries like Italy. We've been distributing for about 4 years. Programs like ours have been doing this since about 1996. So this is nothing new. We're not asking you to do anything new and crazy and experimental. That's not the goal here. We're going to give you something that's highly safe and effective. The wonderful thing about naloxone is it doesn't do anything to anybody who's not overdosing. So you can give it to somebody in good faith, and even if they're not overdosing, you're not going to do anything to them. So again, I think a lot of the people's concerns is, what are you asking me to do, and is this going to do anything? Am I going to be held liable? I see you guys shaking already with the liability piece. They've changed a lot of the laws to make sure that there's no liability, but there's also no danger if you're not going to do anything to anybody. Okay? It also has no potential for abuse. So basically the way naloxone works in the body is like this. Again, if you remember that it's about up here, it's about opiates and receptors, is that basically what naloxone does is it goes into the system and kicks the opiates off the receptors. Off the receptors, not out of the system. Okay, so they get off the receptors, not out of the system. Naloxone's it takes about 3 to 5 minutes to work, and it only lasts for about 30 to 90 minutes. Okay, short chunk. So the problem with this is that, one, it's a miracle drug, and that will wake somebody up if you get to them in time. You know what you're looking at, you get to them in time. The problem is this. Most opiates last a lot longer than 30 to 90 minutes, correct? Right? You know much about opiates. Some of them are meant to last a day. Some of them are meant to last multiple hours. So if you think about overdose like this, as someone is used, they've overdosed, you've given them naloxone, the opiates aren't out of the system, they're just off the receptors. They're still floating around up there. When the naloxone wears off, the opiates go right back onto the receptors, and you can go right back to where you were. Okay? Someone was telling me a story earlier about how they went out to respond, they didn't know this piece, they went out to respond to an overdose, gave the guy naloxone, woke him up, and then we're like, no, you're good. They left. And then 45 minutes later, they got another call. Opiates went right back onto the receptors, guy went right back to where he was. There's a really important piece about this, so there's a really important takeaway about this, is the person absolutely positively needs to go to the hospital, okay? Because what's gonna happen is they're gonna get to the hospital, and they're gonna get hooked up probably to an IV drip, and they're gonna get more naloxone. So again, you can't overdose on naloxone, you can't have too much naloxone. And basically what the doctor's gonna do is they're gonna wait out the naloxone, or excuse me, they're gonna wait out the drugs in the system with naloxone, okay? So very safe, very effective. Any questions on that piece?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Let's say someone's overdosing, what is the period of time that, let's say, I can get to them with the Narcan to help them? Is it 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
If someone, so I'll answer that a little bit more in depth in a minute, but if someone is overdosing and you have naloxone, you're gonna give them naloxone. And don't worry about the time frame, just give it to them.
There's enough breathing, so you
Right.
can get it to them.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. So this is, again, just a little illustration of how naloxone works. Again, it sort of holds the receptors for a short period of time, about 30 to 90 minutes. A few really important pieces to understand about overdose is this, is that it doesn't pick and choose who it kind of goes after just about everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're an experienced user or an inexperienced user. And as we talk about the risk factors, this will become clear, is that, it's interesting, what you actually see with, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, risk factors, is that the principal risk factor for heroin overdose death is previous heroin overdose. In other words, what you actually see is if someone's overdosing, you see more overdoses. You're more than likely to see continual overdoses, but it kind of gets everybody. It happens, and this is a really important piece, is it happens over the course of 1 to 3 hours the vast majority of the time. So about 85% of overdoses are going to occur over 1 to 3 hours. They're not going to be instantaneous. So again, you see in a lot of media and a lot of movies oftentimes this idea that sort of needle in the arm, like someone uses and they kind of fall out. Statistically, that's about less than 50% of the overdoses that occur. It's a double-edged sword. One, if you know what you're looking for, you know how to respond. Okay? So you know what you're looking for. The other side of that is we tend to be a cause and effect society. We sort of have the expectation that if you're going to use, we kind of expect the results. And when we don't see that impact, we don't see those results, we think everything's clear, we're good. But the reality is, so what happens when you, say now we're talking about respiratory depression again. What happens when you're breathing, not breathing well? What do you feel?
Lightheaded.
What do you do when you feel lightheaded?
Pass out.
You go lay down, pass out. The problem is you're going that way the whole time. One of the messages we really try to give people is if you're going to use, make sure you're using with somebody, make sure that person's checking on you. Okay? You get phone calls also from mothers at times at night, especially from, it seems like it comes a lot from the mothers, is my son's only breathing 4 times a minute. Is that adequate? It's like, no, we're not giving you we're not giving you specific information. Generally, if something seems off, if something seems wrong, the breathing pattern isn't right, make that phone call. Okay? So it's going to be 1 to 3 hours. It's rarely going to be instantaneous. Okay? So the risk factors. Any questions before I go into the risk factors? Okay. So everyone understand a little bit about tolerance? What tolerance is about? Right. You sort of use, and then you need more to kind of get the same result. You use, you need more to get the same result. You use more. Okay. It sort of ups like this. The idea behind tolerance, the takeaway message is this: tolerance to opiates can decrease as little as 72 hours. So self-imposed breaks, detox, drug-free treatment, incarceration, things like that, can increase risk for overdose. I think the way we often talk about it is that for a lot of people, after a period of use, people get to that point where they're injecting and they want to stop. And people will try on their own. They'll try to stop. They'll take short breaks. They'll go to detox for the week for a couple of 72 hours, whatever some of your insurance will often pay for. But you take that small break, and your tolerance can decrease. And all of what this is really about is, like, when you talk about tolerance, this is people use a certain rate and develop a tolerance. But when you take a break, your tolerance decreases. So what oftentimes people end up doing is trying to go back out and use what they used. But while they used up here, the tolerance is down here. Okay? So you tend to see overdoses as a result of that. But the takeaway is it can decrease as little as 72 hours. Mixing drugs, and I'm going to talk about this very generally. I mean, the two that we really kind of hit upon are benzos and alcohol, central nervous system depressants. You tend to see overdose. In about 50% of overdoses, you see mixing of drugs. You see other drugs. Most of the time, it's benzos and alcohol. The takeaway with this is that 1 + 1 does not equal 2. 1 + 1 = 10. So the way to think about it is this: on one hand, alone, separately, you can use a little bit of this or a good amount of this. On one hand alone, you can use a little bit of this or a good amount of this. But if you mix a little bit of this with a little bit of this, it becomes 1 +